The idea for Stormclouds came from a conversation I had with Michael O'Brien, my publisher, and Michael thought it'd be interesting to have a story set during the Troubles. And we'd been working our way through the 20th century, through the lockout and the Civil War and the Second World War. So the next really big upheaval in Irish history was the Troubles. And initially I was a little bit worried because I thought it could be sort of a gloomy subject. But then when we thought about it and talked about it and went through it a little more, we thought that actually most of the people who'd be reading the book would be 12 or 13 or 14, and they wouldn't remember the Troubles. It would simply be history to them. So the story could be approached in the same way as the other books that I'd written. And the Troubles would be the backdrop against which the story would unfold. That it would still be an exciting page-turning adventure for our kids, but that the Troubles would be going on in the background. And what we thought would make it really interesting would be, I decided to set it in the very first year of the Troubles, so that it goes from the beginnings in March of 1969, when the kids are living normal lives and playing football and all the rest, and 6 months later people are being burnt out of their houses. So I thought that would be a really dramatic story arc. And once I kind of came up with that idea, the story fell into place. Yeah, I did lots of research for the book, as you always have to do, obviously, with historical novels. I went up to Belfast, I went into the Falls Road Library, and they let me go through the archives there. Also, and almost more importantly, I spoke to people who were the age of my characters who grew up in Belfast. So I wanted to find people who were, say, 11 or 12 years old in 1969 in Belfast, and I tracked down people who fitted that description, and they very kindly told me, you know, what kind of programs they watched on television and all the things that kids did in that era. And the other thing that I always do in all my historical books is I find out what were the pop songs of the day, because I think that's really important. When I was 11 or 12, I knew all the pop songs, so I wanted to find out what was going on in the world and what kind of songs the kids were singing, just to recreate that world, to make it real. And so that involved quite a bit of enjoyable research. I'd say it took about 7 or 8 months in total to write the book. 3 or 4 months of actual writing the first draft, and the rest of the time doing the research, coming up with the characters, coming up with the plot, and then going back and polishing it and tightening it and fixing it and having it edited. Excuse me. So in total, I'd say 7 or 8 months to write Stormclouds. I started writing books in 1988. I can remember it exactly. I was over in Kilmainham Jail. I'd always meant to go there, and I brought my kids one wet Sunday, and I saw a thing on the wall about the Invincibles. And I just read a really exciting historical thriller, and I realised, here's a great story waiting to be told. And I thought, if I could weave fictional characters around the assassination that the Invincibles carried out in the 1880s, you could write a terrific historical thriller. And I was in the middle of writing a play at the time, and I couldn't wait to get the play finished to write the book, and that was my first book, Invincible. So a long time ago now. I write mostly in my office. I have a study at home, and I work regular office hours. I start at 9 o'clock and I work till 1. I start again at 2 and I work till 5:30 or 6, and I do that 5 days a week. So mostly that's where I write. Sometimes if I'm travelling, if I'm in an airport or a hotel or a restaurant or somewhere like that, I can sort of zone out from where I am, take out a piece of paper and actually write a scene if I put my mind to it. But generally speaking, I do 90% of all my work in the office, where I have everything to hand, and that's where I'm most comfortable writing. The best thing about being an author, well, there are lots of good things, some bad things. I'd say the best single thing probably is the fact that no 2 days are ever the same, that each day is a little journey of discovery, because when you sit down to write a scene, okay, you know roughly speaking what's going to happen in that scene, but you don't know exactly how you're going to do it. You just know that 2 characters maybe are going to have a row. So every day when you set off, you don't really know where you're going to wind up. And that's exciting, because at the end of the day you wound up sometimes in places you never thought you'd be. So I think that aspect really appeals to me, and also I like the sense of working for myself, the freedom. I work kind of long hours, but I'm more or less my own boss when I'm doing them. So those are the features that really appeal to me. Well, my favourite book as a child, that's a difficult question. I can't pick out one single book really, but my favourite author was Enid Blyton. She was really popular when I was a kid in the 60s. And the books, she wrote a series of books called The Five Find Outers, and I loved those books. They were kind of these kids they set themselves up as detectives, and they solved the mystery in each book. And even though they were probably there was a kind of a formula, they were all somewhat similar, I still loved them. I thought they were great books. So the Five Find Outer books when I was a kid, they were my favourite. Well, I like a lot of writers. Obviously, most writers read a lot. Irish writers that I like would be, Flann O'Brien, the obvious kind of candidates. But if I had to pick out, and I like English writers like David Lodge and Ken Follett's a great thriller writer, Welsh guy. But the writer whose work I really admire is James Plunkett, who wrote Strumpet City, because I think that's a wonderful, wonderful novel, and it took him years to write it. And I really admire someone who could take that long, invest so much time and effort in a book, and then come up with what I think was a masterpiece. So I would take my cap off to James Plunkett if I was forced to pick one. If I could go back in time, I think I would go back to the 60s when I was a child, because I think it would be really, really interesting now that I'm older to go back to being the age of the people who are reading my books. So I'd love to go back to a day when I was, about 12 and get up in the morning in my old house and go through a day. I think that would be really fascinating. And also historically, a lot of things were going on in the 60s. It was a very turbulent time and lots of interesting historical events took place then. Apart from my own childhood, other than that, I think I'd like to go back maybe about 100 years to the early part of the 20th century, because I'd love to walk around Dublin and see what it was like in the early 1904, 1905, something like that, when Ulysses, James Joyce's great book, was set in Dublin. I'd love to see what the city was like before all the changes came around. So that would be another interesting time. But anyway, I won't be doing either of them, but I'd love to go back. I'd say the biggest single tip I would have for budding writers is do something short to begin with. Don't try to write a full-length novel or a full-length play. Write a short story, something that can be where you can see the light at the end of the tunnel, if you like, from the very beginning. Because the hardest thing when you're starting off is it's a bit overwhelming and a bit overpowering to think that you've got to write a story. It's very difficult the first time you try to do it. So if you do something short, it's doable. Even if it's really badly written, just get it down, because once you have something down on paper, no matter how awful you might think it is, you can go back and clean it up and tidy it and improve it. Whereas the hardest thing I think for people at the beginning is just getting something finished, and so many people start off something and then they panic and they leave it. Whereas if it's something like really short, a short story that's only a few pages long, you can force yourself to get to the end. So that would be my main piece of advice, is do something short and make sure you finish it.